Hello guys, my name is Anna and I'm from Ukraine. Brutal Russian invasion changed the life of every Ukrainian and it did change mine. I have started vlogging to keep you updated on real life situation in my country and also to clarify some facts from our history, culture or language. So if you're new to the channel and you support Ukraine, please subscribe. Today, I want to react to President Biden's speech where he says that tactic nuclear threats from Russia are very real. And I have to agree with the President of the United States because, first of all, Russia is crazy, and second, they have the potential to do that. And as a Ukrainian, as a professional Ukrainian that does not leave its country during these challenging times, I will explain to you how it feels to live under constant nuclear threat. Just the same as with war, you will be surprised how quickly our minds and bodies adapt to this abnormal environment because otherwise you cannot eat, sleep, or continue working. And all of that is very important for our future victory. So at the very beginning of this war and approximately every other month, we have some news that say how dangerous potential nuclear war is and that Russia is capable of doing that. Well, logic tells me it is total absurd to use nuclear weapons because that would mean the end to the world. I mean, if like real nuclear war happens, and perhaps I hope that all the international organizations responsible for the protection of the world will react, not just express their, how do they like to say that? So we express our concerns, but they will react, but nobody wins in this situation. So I hope that this instinct that Putin has, and he definitely wants to leave, that's why he hides in bunkers, that's why he tests for COVID everyone who is in contact with him. That's why he uses doublets. That all of these things will prevent him from actually pushing the button and starting the nuclear war. But this is logics. My experience as a Ukrainian proves that logics does not work when we talk about Russia, Soviet Union, Russian Empire, whatever monster on that part of the world we are dealing with. They change names, but they don't change attitudes to human life, to freedom. They hate, detest, and suppress. So, my logics proved me that full-scale war with Russia is absurd, like no one needs that, no way that Russia can win, but they started it on February last year. So the very same logic may play a trick on us when we believe that it is totally illogical to start a nuclear war and Putin will be able to do that. Well, President Biden used a very kind word when describing Russian behavior on transporting their nuclear weapons to Belarus, which adds stress and threats to a large part of Europe. And he named these actions of Putin irresponsible. Well, I think, well, the way I make my coffee in the morning is irresponsible because every time I miss the moment when it boils, that's irresponsible from me. But I have to clean the mess and no one, a part of me, suffers from that. In case with nuclear weapons that travel to a country that does not have nuclear potential and thus is not allowed to use it by any international conventions, I think it's more than irresponsible. And if we did not have like full-scale war in Ukraine, and if we did not have so many people who are afraid and just concerned about escalation, perhaps a serious reaction should have followed that. And honestly, just with as with the annexation of Crimea, I think that lack of reaction is a signal to Putin that he can continue terrorizing and bullying the world. So this is a very negative tendency that so many nuclear weapons travel to Belarus that does not have a right to keep these nuclear weapons and nobody says nothing. Why? Because that's Russia. Russia is always crazy and let's not provoke. Let Russia provoke the rest of the world. I know that, like, as a Ukrainian, you have to learn more about weapons and everything. So now I know that not all nuclear weapons cause like total destruction and atomic winter or whatever we watch in the movies. Some of them, like tactic nuclear weapons, and Biden was talking about them, cause serious destruction and human losses and environmental tragedies, but to a limited amount of land. And Putin repeatedly threatens to attack Ukraine, of course, but also lots of adjacent countries and even the United States, it seems to me London, and many of other democratic countries. Why? Because he detests democracy and other people living normal lives. And I realize that it is possible, and I don't know what the reaction of the world will be. I am very much afraid that the world will just like observe it in online regime, because that's what it often does in such situations. Not to escalate. The only party that escalates in this war is always and always Russia. Whenever Russia wants to finish this war, just a second. But they don't. They continue destroying, killing, and terrorizing the world. In Ukraine, what we believe is that first, they will be afraid to use nuclear potential because of the reaction of the world that can even lead to like total destruction of Putin's regime. I mean physical destruction. Second, we all know how bad Russians are and how corrupt their army, so perhaps we can divide by 3 or 4 their nuclear potential. Perhaps it's not working properly, or they have already sold it to some countries like North Korea. And third, they will use an option, something different, so that they can blame. It was Ukrainians who did that, something similar what they wanted to do with the explosion of Kakhovka Dam. They were spreading the news that these are not Russians, these are Ukrainians. So in case of our internal concerns, we are very much worried about the nuclear power stations that are all over Ukraine, because back in Soviet times, many of them were built here to export cheap electrical energy to Europe. And actually, Ukraine is a great producer of cheap electric power, but Russians destroy our infrastructure to cause genocide. And also, we had a very bad experience of Chernobyl. And for a nation that just a couple of generations, or maybe like a generation ago, suffered from the greatest environmental nuclear catastrophe, it is like a very traumatic experience to think about something similar can happen in future. Why? Because not only we saw it in the movies, we experienced that. Even in my school years, I remember various pills we were given to drink, and various things we had not to collect in the forest, because all of that was still under the influence of radiation. So we now, not from the words, but from our real life, how devastating catastrophes on nuclear power stations can be. And now irresponsible behavior of Russian occupiers on Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station. Explosion of Kakhovka Dam that can lead to the problems in the cooling systems of this nuclear power plant. And other power plants that are located all around Ukraine are potential targets for Russian missiles. And if a nuclear power station is targeted, you can only imagine the level of devastation it can cause. And many Ukrainians have long ago counted the closest nuclear power stations, the distances we have from them. For example, the ones that are closest to me, there are 2 actually, and they are more than 100 kilometers, which gives me approximately 1 hour to collect the things I need and to hide, to avoid radiation. So imagine, that is our normality. That is an ordinary Ukrainian Facebook or something, or media, news, or even Instagram, where you can come across information how to act in case of nuclear explosion, where the closest nuclear power stations are, and how much time you have to hide, how do you have to do that, what do you have to take with you, and so on and so forth. Once again, for a nation traumatized by Chernobyl explosion. This is like no PTSD, or how do you call it, syndrome of like when you've experienced something really bad, can compare to that. So, of course, we follow that news on nuclear threats very attentively. But I will ask you a question. What choice do we have? We cannot surrender. We have to win this war, and we are successful in our counter-offensive that we lead according to all the international rules and the rules of war. We protect our motherland. We do not invade anything. We have to protect ourselves because this is an existential fight. And if we give up, if we let Russia win, first of all, we die, and second, they will continue to other countries. So there is no way that we can give up, and we cannot follow the terrorist demands of Russia. And once again, a very important reminder, a victim can never escalate. Only an aggressor does that, and Russia does that continuously. And once again, we all have to agree that Russia is a terrorist state and should be treated that way. Thank you so much for your support and understanding. Thank you for buying me coffees, becoming my patrons. Please subscribe to my Twitter and Instagram accounts. I'm trying to be more active there, and every new subscriber gives me inspiration. Thank you so much for being with me, and Slava Ukraini!